Welcome to Dare, the show for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders who dare to shape the future. Your hosts today are Ned Hayes and Cecilia Mariani. Dare is brought to you by Darwaf, the superpower tech team that can make your vision a reality. The Dare podcast is excited to welcome Brian Beckcom to the show. He's a computer scientist, he's a philosopher, he's a trial attorney, and he really specializes in areas of great interest to our audience. He has abiding interest in computer science and artificial intelligence. In fact, he has degrees from Texas A&M in CS and philosophy. So happy to welcome this esteemed lawyer and a great thinker to our show today. Welcome, Brian.
Ned, it's great to be here. I really am looking forward to this conversation. The stuff that we're going to talk about is stuff that gets me really excited. So thank you for having me.
Sure. Well, you co-founded BB Attorneys in Texas there. So tell us about what your company does before we get into the philosophical talk.
Yeah. So in short, VB Attorneys represents primarily people that have been mistreated by insurance companies or big corporations. And so we handle all sorts of different kinds of cases. I'm a trial lawyer, which means I'm one of the guys you see in court some of the time. Most of the cases settle, quite frankly, because we choose cases that are good cases, or at least we try to.
Yeah.
But that's what I do. My focus, and I've got kind of an interesting specialty area. So I do a lot of maritime law, which means like people working on dredges and tugboats and ships out in the ocean and oil rigs that are out in the ocean. And those are really, really important jobs, but they're also very dangerous jobs. So I have a specialty. In fact, some of your listeners may remember the movie Captain Phillips. That was a movie starring Tom Hanks. Yeah. So what happened there was the Maersk, Alabama was basically, it was captured by 4 Somali pirates, and they held a bunch of them hostage for a while. I ended up representing the crew of that entire ship. I was on Nightline. I was on Good Morning America. Yeah, it was a really, really fascinating case. And one of the things I'm most proud about is
Captain Phillips?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're most proud of representing them or working with them?
What I'm most proud about that case is so one of the things we said in that case is the area that they were taking these ships off the coast of Somalia, it was the most pirate-infested area in the world at the time. And the thing that people don't understand about these Somali pirates, they're not really pirates. Most of them were poor fishermen, and so they're not well armed. And all you needed to do was provide just a little bit of security to the men and women that were on these ships, and you wouldn't have any more piracy attacks because they're not well armed. And so since the Maersk, Alabama was attacked, there has not been a single successful pirate attack on an American ship in Somalia that I'm aware of. So we were able to, and there's a good reason for that too, because now they provide the people working on these ships with some sort of defense. They were literally defenseless before our lawsuit. And when we said you should provide them with some sort of defense, you would think the insurance companies thought we were crazy. But now that's the standard. So I'm really, really proud of that. We've also been able to increase safety in various consumer products that were hurting people. We've been involved in some pharmaceutical litigation that has made pharmaceutical drugs either safer or it's raised safety alarms about them. So I really, really enjoy what I do because I think at the end of the day, what we do is make the world a safer place for everybody.
Right. Well, I've lived and worked in various countries overseas, and invariably, when I talk to people about how the United States functions compared to their country, and the United States is not a perfect country by any means, but we function. And invariably, people tell me the thing that works in your country is the rule of law. Like if you're pulled over and you have a Maserati or you have, some little crappy Civic, you'll still get a ticket. Now, you might be able to fight it with different lawyers, but the thing is, you'll get a ticket. You can't just wave the policeman off. You can't just bribe the judge. Like, sure, our system is not perfect, but law has an inevitable arc. As Martin Luther King said, it trends towards justice.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the most beautiful things about our country. And sometimes I think we forget about how important that is. So whatever your political affiliations are, the last election was a mess. I think everybody will agree with that. And it was the court system that got it straightened out. And without the rule of law, without the court system, it's literally anarchy. And I don't want to be too melodramatic about it, but just like you said, if you can just bribe a police officer or bribe a judge, then there are no rules and we have total chaos. Now, just like our country's not perfect, our legal system's not perfect either. There's some things that go bad. There's frivolous cases. Quite frankly, in my experience, I see far more frivolous defenses from insurance companies than I see frivolous lawsuits. But it's not perfect. But it's like Winston Churchill said about democracy, it's the worst form of government except for all the others. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. So we both believe in the rule of law. And I think we both also believe that thinking deeply about AI and thinking deeply about where technology is taking us is important for us to do. I think often we are traveling at fast momentum down the tracks without thinking through the consequences. So have you run into any situations like that in your law practice?
Well, the thing that is on kind of the top of my mind right now, and this is kind of a legal question, but it's also a philosophical and a technical question. And that is what happens when we can't tell the difference between things that are AI generated and things that aren't. So I'll give you a real specific example of this. Google just came out with a new AI product called Notebook. I don't know if you've heard of it, but essentially you can upload a document, and I've done this, and it will create a 10-minute podcast with two people talking about it that sounds like I've sent it to a couple people and they didn't know it was AI generated. And
Right,
so,
right. In the
yeah,
product, and it's amazing. The voices sound very human. It's a
yeah,
discussion. If you tag your voice in it, or your name, it will mention your name as having some insights. It's an
yeah,
astonishing product. It's really well done if that's what we want.
yeah. And that's a big question. Like, do we want that? I frankly think at this point, we don't have much of a choice. The question is, how do we deal with this? And so, I noticed a phenomena about a year ago. I'm a YouTube guy. I like to watch YouTube at night. And, I like to watch, my wife makes fun of me because she'll walk in there and I'll be watching something about calculus or something about programming a large language. She thinks I'm a complete geek. But one thing I
Yeah,
started noticing, Ned, was a lot of the videos are now AI generated. And
really.
on YouTube, yeah. And so, for example, there's these shorts, and every single one of them is the same voice. And I just started noticing that there's going to come a time where you won't know the difference. We're not quite there yet, but we're pretty darn close. And when we don't know the difference between what's human generated and what's machine generated, that raises all sorts of very, very profound ethical considerations. And, one of the things I've been on a lot of podcasts and I've talked about this quite a bit. Whatever you think about Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, the Bill Gates, all the people that run these big tech companies, they may be the best engineers in the world, but that doesn't mean they have any insight at all when it comes to ethical issues. And so, but I think what we do sometimes as a society to our detriment is we think just because somebody is a great engineer and makes a great product, they're also a great ethicist. And not
Mhm.
only is that necessarily not true, but it also is potentially a problem because people that are making money off of these products have certain incentives. And look, I'm the biggest capitalist in the world. I'm not complaining about people making money, but we have to be open minded about the fact that the people that are making these decisions are a small subset of people that may not have the larger interest of our society front and center. And so, what I want is more, frankly, I don't think we need more engineers. I think we need more philosophers. I think we need more people that can think broadly about these issues. There's all sorts, we could go on and on about this. I don't know if you're familiar with the uncanny valley, but
Absolutely. Yeah. So
yeah.
for our listeners, do you want to just explain the uncanny valley in brief?
Yeah, so the uncanny valley is the idea that, and the example I like to use is R2D2 from Star Wars. Everybody
Mhm.
knows R2D2 is a robot. You just look at him;
Yeah.
he's a robot.
Very,
C3PO,
very obvious. Beeps,
very,
boops. Yeah,
yeah,
very
very,
obvious.
very, very obvious. That's what a computer's supposed, or that's what a robot is supposed to look like. But as robots get more and more human, ironically, it becomes creepier and creepier and creepier until, so imagine a XY chart
Hmm.
where C3PO or R2D2 is a cute, friendly,
Yeah.
non-threatening robot because everybody knows who he is. But imagine this chart that goes in a downward direction, and the x-axis would be closest to humans, and the y-axis would be uncomfortable. Humans have this uncomfortable reaction, this instinctual reaction. As you get closer and closer to being human-like, it becomes weirder and weirder until all of a sudden you don't know the difference.
Mm.
And we're really close. A good Westworld is a great movie, not only because, or a great TV show, not only because it's a great show, but because it raises profound philosophical questions. Like those robots in that show, Westworld, you can't tell the
Yes.
difference. And so, what does that mean for us as humans? I don't
Right.
really know the answer to the question, but these are things that we have to be considering. Another thing I like to think about is I'm a big reader. I like to read a lot. And I just read Ulysses by James Joyce last year, which is a
Hmm.
phenomenally hard, it's the hardest book I've ever read. I literally had to have a book next to me to help me figure out what I was reading. But once we get large language models that can write like humans,
Right.
it's not just that we're going to have the ability to produce these kind of texts, but I worry about the fact is, in 10, 20 years, who's going to know the difference between a great work of art like Ulysses and a computer generated piece of art? That's what I worry about, losing that human aspect of those kinds of stories.
Right. The philosophical questions of what is a human being goes all the way back to Descartes. I think, therefore I am. Well, if a system can reason, as OpenAI is proclaiming that their new systems can, or their new models can reason, then does that make them functionally equivalent? And philosophically, there are lots of directions we could go with it. But the question remains of how far do we go down that uncanny valley until we've crossed over? And is that a good thing or not?
Yeah. And that's an absolutely phenomenal way to put it. There's a philosophical, scientific idea called theory of mind, which I'm
Hmm.
sure you and a lot of your listeners are familiar with. And the basic idea behind that is, how do I know? The only thing that I can be absolutely sure of is that I am conscious. Me individually is conscious. I don't know, Ned, for sure that you are. And
Hmm.
so it's the same thing with an AI. Like when you're talking to an AI, that sounds and acts conscious, how do you know whether it's conscious or not? You don't, basically. And so, what do you do in that situation? And frankly, at some point, does it matter? Like, in other words, if a AI can think and reason and pass the Turing test easily, does it matter that it's conscious if it acts conscious? In other words, if you're interacting with a computer and it says it needs something, I'm hungry, I need some electricity or something like that,
Yeah.
does it matter whether the computer is having an internal experience or not? I think it probably does, but if we can't tell the difference, does it really?
Right. And so the question of humanity and artificial beings or artificial intelligence is one question. The next question I have, though, is as we approach that line of AIs being able to write books, being able to create art, being able to ask for things and come across as reliably human, like in the Google Notebook podcast scenario, I guess the next question is if we have something that is AI generated and it looks like art, it feels like art, it taste of humanity, so to speak, and we have something that can be certified as human, is it worth certifying it? Is it worth saying this human thing is different and distinct in a unique way? Like, is there value there? And I don't have a good answer for that, but I'm curious about your answer.
I think it's a great question. And again, that this is what the role of philosophers has always been historically. Like, for example, we didn't used to call science science. We called it natural philosophy. The job of philosophers is to ask the questions that you just asked. The job of the scientists is to go answer those questions. And, one of the big problems for the people in your audience that have been around computer science for a long time, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But proof of identity online has always been a problem.
Mhm.
And we actually have some solutions to that right now. And when people think about Bitcoin, they forget about the underlying technology, which is a blockchain technology. And the whole idea behind the blockchain technology is to prove that, or at least part of the reason is proof of identity online, which has been a huge problem. So, for example, you could take blockchain technology now and basically stamp things as authentically produced by humans or not. So we have the technology is actually there to do that. And
Mhm.
I think it's for sure worth doing right now. But again, Ned, I think the horse is out of the barn. And so I don't think we're going to be dealing in the future with the question of, can you tell the difference? The question is, what do we do about it? And
Right.
for now, I think it's important to stamp things as human or not. But in the future, maybe that's not as important. Maybe it is. But the point is like we need people
Maybe.
thinking about these questions.
Yeah, just to float something. Maybe it becomes like the organic label. Like I go to the store, I see two red tomatoes. One has the label organic and it costs $1 more. One doesn't. I don't have a spectrometer or whatever I need to actually analyze the difference, but I just say, oh, I'll pay $1 more because it's organic. It's different
Yeah.
in some way that I can't fully identify with my eyes, but I trust the label. And
Yeah.
so maybe I say, I'm going to go with that. Much like, I might say, well, this play was written by Ibsen or by Shakespeare, so I'm going to trust that it's different in some way that I can't fully define on my own recognizance.
The question, I think you're missing, it's a good analogy, but there's a hole in it.
Okay.
When you stamp something as organic, that is a human being making that decision and doing that. AI is going to get to the point, it's already there, but it's going to
Yeah.
get to the point where it can stamp itself as human if it wants to, and we may not be able to know the difference, is my point. In other words, if in fact these open AIs and these large language models can actually reason and not just do what they do. So for people that aren't familiar with large language models and how they work, they're essentially prediction machines. And so they take a huge set of data, and you've heard of the word token. A token could be one letter, it could be a group of letters, it could be a whole word. But essentially, they take these tokens, they put them in a big chart. So let's use the most common word in the English language, the. And then the next column will be thousands of potential words that would follow that, the cat. And then it uses some mathematics and some statistics and some recursion to pop out an answer. That to me is not necessarily reasoning. That's just pure math. And until we get a computer that can reason without just using spreadsheets and statistics, I think a good question that we could talk about is there something unique about the human thought process or the human way of reasoning that machines cannot emulate? I can tell you right now, like I used to drive a Tesla, and one of the reasons I drove a Tesla is because I wanted to see how the self-driving worked. The self-driving is so stupid. It's beyond, I mean, it is dumb. And so when you're inside of a Tesla and you're doing the self-driving and you see how poorly it identifies things. So for example, it used to be in a Tesla, if you had a bike, if there was a car in front of you with a bike strapped to the back, you know how some people will put like bicycles on the back? It would interpret that as a car in front and a bike going parallel to the car.
Not very intelligent.
Not very intelligent, but what they've done is they have absolutely bombarded these computers with huge amounts of data so they can tune themselves and ultimately figure out, hey, that's a bike strapped to a car. The human mind can pick that up instantaneously. And so I personally believe that there is something about the function of the human brain, and I don't want to get too crazy here, but at a quantum level, not even a subatomic level, but a quantum level that is light years ahead of machine intelligence. So just think about, for example, I think this is how nerdy I am about this stuff. Think about when you toss a ball to your kid and he catches it and throws it back. That takes so much calculus and so much mathematics, but human beings do it instantaneously. Like we don't use a lot of processing power in order to figure out how to hold our arm up, where to hold it up. A computer would literally have to take the starting point of the ball. It would have to use calculus and differential equations to determine the velocity and the acceleration. It would have to figure out how to move your arm in a certain way and close your hand. Humans do that instantaneously. I haven't seen a computer get anywhere close to that. And that's because I think fundamentally that the human mind is a quantum system. And I'll give you a really, really good example of this, okay? This is something I've been thinking about for quite some time. I like to meditate, and I like to meditate fairly deeply. And if you meditate fairly deeply, eventually you'll have an experience where you'll recognize that like this self that you think is in your head isn't really there. It's just processes moving around in your head. But here's the insight, okay? The second you realize that, you're thinking again. Okay, so you've lost that meditative state. And I draw an analogy between that and quantum mechanics. And here's what I mean by that. One of the fundamental ideas behind quantum mechanics is that the act of observation changes the state of what you're observing. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, for example, it is impossible under the laws of quantum mechanics to determine both the velocity or acceleration and the exact position of something at the same time, because it's actually fairly easy to understand. If I tell you the exact position of something, I've lost the ability to tell you how it's moving. If I can tell you how something is moving, I've lost the ability to tell you precisely where it's at. But the point is that I think the fact when we observe our thoughts, they change is a quantum phenomena. And I think humans have a huge advantage over computers in that regard right now. Now, we could talk about quantum computers at some point. That changes the game for everybody. I mean, quantum computer that came online tomorrow would make every single password and security obsolete immediately.
Right, being able to encrypt things, a quantum computer could decrypt things at a much higher level of fidelity than the computers that we have today.
Yeah. And you know why that is? It's kind of cool if you believe in the multiverse. It's because quantum computers can access information in different universes, at least theoretically. Now,
Theoretically, yeah.
yeah,
So I want to come back to your idea, though, of somebody catching a baseball versus a computer trying to catch a baseball. And I just wanted to touch on that because, I've heard the analogy that tech bros have used, billions of dollars and these huge amount of infrastructure to do computing to recreate what a relatively, middle of the line English major can do with a ham sandwich and half a night of sleep,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Terms of creating a short story or creating a book or anything. Like I strongly believe that the humanities are what people should major in because I think 20 years from now, 30 years from now, a lot of the coding that we do, a lot of the other stuff can be easily duplicated by computers. And I don't
yeah.
think that their level thinking is as easily duplicated in a novel way. You can write a crappy Transformers movie, fine. A computer can do that. But I'm not sure that distinctive characteristic, that novel approach that human beings have, will be duplicated so easily. That's a belief that I hold on to. We'll see if I'm right or not.
I'm so glad you said that now because I've been telling people for a while now that you should major in liberal arts.
Yeah.
like there are a lot of the technical fields are going to be automated, which is okay, by the way. There's people are afraid of that. I don't think we should necessarily be afraid of that, but you're right. It's the non-technical areas where humans really, really stand out. I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but this is how dumb computers are. So, these CAPTCHA codes that you have to enter where in order to prove you're human, and there'll be these pictures of like, pick out all of the street lights or pick out all the stop signs. And so you hit the button and then it lets you go into whatever you're going into. That technology is actually fed in to deep neural learning network. We are training AIs when we do that. So every time you identify all those stop signs, that data is sent to an AI so it can get better and better. We can, again, we can do that instantaneously without thinking about it. So computers are dumb right now and they look smart, but like once you've looked under the hood of a large language model, you realize it's really not that impressive, at least compared to the human mind. And again, that's because I think there's something different about whether it's the physical infrastructure of the human brain or the way that the human brain, the neurons connect and, we come up with different ideas. They've tried to mimic that with computers. So neural networks, basically, if you think about like a node of graphs, they try to work the same way the human neuron works, but it's not even in the same ballpark in terms of how we do it. So they're not very smart right now, but they look smart. And they're fooling us. That's where the problem is. And so like we need philosopher kings, like we need people to protect what is uniquely human. And one of the things I'm going to dovetail into kind of a little different conversation here. In my mind, you've got a book behind you called Story, which is a great book. I actually believe that the most powerful thing in human history, this has been the most powerful thing for the last however many thousands of years and will be the most powerful thing, is ideas, the power of ideas. So it's ideas that send armies. Armies are not the most powerful thing in the world. It's the ideas that send armies into battle. It's the ideas of democracy. It's the idea that this piece of paper that I have in my wallet is actually worth something. And ideas are based on stories. In fact, I would argue that humans are not able to think about anything without telling themselves a story about it. And so that is one area where I think the human mind is different from computers. Computers are not telling themselves stories. They're not communicating in terms of stories. They're communicating in terms of, basically bits that are turning on and off. And so we have some advantages here. Like we have a lot of advantages, but we got to be smart about it. Like, you've heard about the example of what do you do with an AI? Like maybe you have an AI and you say, this AI your job is to make paper clips. Well, that AI, if it doesn't have the right safety parameters in place, will suck up all the resources in the entire earth to make paper clips, right? Why?
Classic
Because
problem.
yeah, the classic problem. Why will it do that? Because it's smart? No, because it's dumb. Because it doesn't have any independent judgment like we do. And so I think the good news is humans are here to stay. but we do have some competition, right? Like humans will never be the smartest human, the best chess player in the world will never again beat a chess playing computer, ever. Same with Go. That was the Go when the computer beat the human Go player.
Yeah.
Go is far more complicated than chess, which is hard to
Yeah.
believe because after like the 14th move in chess, there's the probabilities, there's more atoms and there's not as many atoms in the universe as there are probabilities. Go is even more complicated and computers have done that. But again, those are bounded games and they're bounded by a set of rules and computers are great at that. Computers are great at making sure that the thermostat stays the right temperature. What they're not good at is going outside those rules and looking at things from a much different and broader perspective. And that's where I think we really have an advantage as human beings.
Wow, that's fantastic to hear because I think there's a lot of people who think that we're accelerating towards a future that kind of doesn't need human beings. And you're saying we do.
I think, yeah, I'm a little biased about this, obviously, but I think computers need us more than we need them. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Maybe that changes a little bit as computers get more powerful and more human-like. But again, until we have quantum computers, they can't keep up with a computer can't do what a 5-year-old child can do in many ways. And so we've got a good head start. Let's not screw it up.
Yeah. We're almost at the end of our time. This has been really fascinating. I'm curious, what do you dare to dream, Brian? If you're looking at the future, what do you dare to dream?
Boy, that's a big question. Probably the thing that's on my mind the most is I think we have right now in our country a big philosophical kind of debate going on. And it's not even out in the open, really, but it's about what are the values of our country? Like, are we going to value certain things over others? Are we going to continue to fight amongst ourselves? Are we going to eventually realize, hey, we're kind of all in this together, and maybe we don't agree on everything. Maybe we don't agree on a lot of things. But at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. And so what I constantly think about is how do we get people to realize that even though we may not agree on anything or even most things, we're on the same team. Like you and I, whether you agree with Trump or Kamala Harris, we're all on the same team, ultimately trying to do kind of the same stuff. And so that's what I think about a lot.
Yeah, assuming goodwill and assuming that we come to a state of agreement on important topics. And I think all too often in America, especially in the United States, we've gotten fragmented away from that ideal. So what you're saying is if we could get to that place where people can trust each other as people of goodwill and people of good faith, that would be a good step forward.
It would be. I think it starts with the realization that I am my brother's keeper. I'm all for individual success and achievement and all that stuff, but I'm also for realizing that the person that lives down the street is my neighbor. And we need to realize that as a country. And the problem we have right now is we get a lot of bad information. It used to be the problem was a lack of information. Now the problem is there's far too much information and most of it is junk. And so figuring out what you can trust and what you can't trust is a huge lift for most people, especially young people that have never known the difference. I mean, you and I, Ned, I'm 52 years old. You're probably somewhat close to me. We're the last generation that will ever remember what it was like not to have social media and cell phones. I mean, our generation is the last one. And I've got 3 kids and they'll never know what it was like not to have a smartphone or social media. And it's tough for them because they've got to cut through a lot of nonsense and figure out what to believe and what not to believe. But if I were to tell a young person nowadays, what's the most important skill you can have, it would be having the intelligence and wisdom and judgment to figure out what you can trust and what you can't.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it. Thanks to our guests today for their great insights on DARE, the podcast for innovators, entrepreneurs, and startup leaders. If you'd like your story to be featured on DARE, just contact us at info@darwaft.com. DARE is brought to you by Darwaft, the tech team that can make your vision a reality.